Now, just to give you some examples, and by the way, much of the writings of Mahmoud Abu Raya, they were absorbed by Western modernists and liberals as well, and in particular, one of the leaders of the feminist Islamic, the Muslim feminist movement, Fatima Mirnisi, who was probably the first intellectual, and she is intellectual. I'm not going to deny that. She knows her stuff. I mean, that's being intellectual doesn't mean you're always right. I mean, it's like she knows her stuff. Fatima Munisi, and she passed away 2 years ago, and she died as a Muslimah. So we ask Allah forgive her, and maybe she was, inshallah, and her niyyah was between her and Allah. But she is essentially the founder of modern Islamic feminism in the Western world. Islamic feminism has Eastern equivalents. She was a Moroccan lady, eventually becomes a professor at Harvard, and she has written a book. The earliest one goes back to 1970, 71. What is it called? The Veil and the Male Elite, or something like this. You can look it up. It's on Amazon. You can find it. She has an entire section dedicated to Abu Hurayrah. See, you cannot be a progressive or a feminist or an LGBT or anything of that nature without rejecting hadith. You have to reject hadith because it's hadith that keeps you in check. If you reject hadith, the Quran becomes easier for you to manage. It's easier for you to manage. You can twist and distort and whatnot. And that is why that trend of Islam is so vicious in its attack on hadith. And that's why we call ourselves Ahl Sunnah. What is the Sunnah here? It's hadith. That's the term we have, is Ahl Sunnah. That's where the orthodoxy comes from. If you stick to the Sunnah, you really will not go too far. There's a spectrum, and inshallah within the spectrum it's all fine and good. Once you reject the Sunnah, then the sky is the limit, and you can twist and turn and do whatever you want. So she has an entire section dedicated to saying really nasty things about Abu Hurairah. I mean, she literally calls him a misogynist, literally. And she calls Abu Hurairah a female hater, misogynist, and that's why he fabricated all of these hadith about women. Don't blame it on the Prophet. He's the one who did it. Right? You see the tactic here, right? Like, discredit him. And by discrediting him, then all of these hadith that I don't like, so that, because see, here's the conundrum. I'm going into my tangent here, but here's the conundrum. How can you claim Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and then not follow his sunnah? You have to get a tactic, right? How can you claim this and then not follow his traditions? So you have a number of tactics, and the most obvious one is to discredit the preservation of hadith, not hadith itself. You understand the difference, right? To discredit the authenticity of the hadith. Because most Muslims don't have any clue how the hadith were compiled. It's a complicated science. So just dismiss it with the flick of a wrist and say, oh, Bukhari lived 250 years after. End of story. And that again shows their shallow nature. And the point is though, if you don't know any better and you read this book, there are interesting things that she brings that will cause you to doubt. And of them, for example, is the famous hadith in Sahih Bukhari that Ibn Umar narrated a hadith in front of Abu Hurairah, and Ibn Umar said that the Prophet ﷺ forbade us to own any dogs. We should not own a dog. Abu Hurairah said, but he made an exception. And of the exceptions is the dog of agriculture and sheep and like that. Okay? So Ibn Umar said, yes, you are the owner of farms and not me. This hadith is in basically Bukhari. It's a Bukhari hadith. Okay? Now, what does this mean? Well, historically, how have people understood this is very simple. That once Abu Hurairah now becomes a businessman, now he is basically, this interaction is taking place obviously way afterwards, 40, 50 hijrah, something like this, way afterwards. And at that time, Abu Hurairah owns lands, he has this and that. So Ibn Umar said, yes, you would know that extra addition because you needed it, I didn't need it. Okay? And of course, Mahmoud Abu Raya and then after her Fatima Mirnisi, they flip it 180 and they say what? He fabricated it and added it for his own benefit. Complete 180. The hadith is very clear in that Abu Hurairah said that, but the Prophet made an exception. And he said, the kalb of the farm is allowed. right? And Ibn Umar said, Na'am, anta sahibu zara. Yes, you are the owner of farms. And everyone in Islamic history has understood this to mean Ibn Umar saying, oh yes, you're right, I didn't really think about that exception because I don't want to have any dogs and no need to me. But you, because especially you're a farmer, you would remember that. I would not remember it, okay? But Fatima Mirsi comes along and says, so even Ibn Umar is accusing Abu Hurairah of lying. No, not at all. Not at all. And other things as well. Can you believe, I'm not exaggerating, this is exactly in her writings. And again, may Allah forgive her, but sometimes you just have very little sympathy for these people, even though she passed away. I shouldn't say too much. May Allah forgive her. I keep on saying that. She is a Muslimah and she died in the state of Islam. But what she wrote is just downright wrong, as simple as that. And can you believe in her book, the male elite and the veil in the male elite, she actually says that Abu Hurairah is a misogynist, and he quotes many evidences for this. And of the evidences is Abu Hurairah narrated a hadith that the woman who tortured her cat is going to go to Jahannam. And this shows that he hated women. You guys following this logic? I can't follow the logic. I can tell you that she said that. Doesn't make any sense to me. Okay? Because he has, the famous hadith of the lady who tortured the cat and didn't allow it to go outside, and so she goes to Jahannam. So she is trying to find evidence that Abu Hurairah hated women. And so she finds this one and she goes, this shows as well that he hated women. And again, it's so easy to refute because pretty much every hadith she doesn't like narrated by Abu Hurairah, you will find it by other companions as well. Just a little bit of research will throw this out the window. It's not just only Abu Hurairah coming with these types of things. And of course, the whole issue of, progressiveness and LGBT and feminism. Again, as you know my stance on this, to me, all of these trends are stepping stones to rejecting Islam. Because once you do the research and you find out that really Islam doesn't live up to those values, there is no other alternative other than to reject Islam. And that is why many people who leave the faith, they actually go through these extreme trends. Because you cannot reconcile Islam with many modern trends. You just can't. And you're going to have to critically decide which version of reality do you prefer, the Quran and Sunnah or certain modern issues that you've considered to be palatable and politically correct. And you can, at a very basic, ignorant level, you can try to say, oh, Islam teaches this and Islam teaches that. And if you don't know any better, you'll live your life like that. But the minute you scratch the surface, the minute you go deeper, you realize you really cannot reconcile. You just can't. And so you end up essentially going one of two ways. Anyway, I'm going into too much detail. Maybe one day I want to give some lectures about this. Definitely it's a very modern problem, and yet it's old. It's not the first time it's happened, but it's the first time it's happened over these issues. Okay? It's not the first time it's happened that certain trends don't mix with Islam, but it's the first time that those trends are the trends we are all aware of. Gender equality, the nature of gender, the transgender issues as well, LGBT issues, feminism as well, humanism, secularism, the discourse on modern human rights. Again, all of this, it's something we need to be very frank about it. If you listen to my, lectures in this, you see we have to find anyway, I'm going into a whole different tangent. I didn't prepare for that. Someday, inshallah, we'll do that. Back to my point. To criticize Abu Hurairah is a criticism of hadith, and a criticism of hadith is a criticism of the Prophet ﷺ. It's that simple. Anyone who wants to criticize this Sahabi, know that deep down inside, the ultimate result is going to be a criticism of the Prophet ﷺ himself.